into the meeting. First of all, just some house cleaning information as usual. I ask that all participants keep their devices on mute until you're ready to talk. That cuts down on the noise from the group. Please use the Zoom raise your hand feature to speak. The system automatically cues the speakers in order that their hands were raised. Keep in mind, we've got a large number of members. Hopefully they'll be here on the call today. And I can't always see if you just physically raise your hand. So please use the Zoom raise your hand feature. If the video conference is disconnected at any time during the meeting will be stopped and reconvened once the audio and video connection is restored. If communications are unable to be restored within 15 minutes, items remaining will be placed on the next scheduled agenda. And with that, again, welcome everyone. We are going to go to the agenda now. The first item on the second item on the agenda is items from the city manager. However, Chief Gorley is not with us yet due to a recruit school graduation that started at the same time as our meeting. So we're going to move ahead to the consultant RFP committee update. And I think Kenny is here, and yes, hopefully he'll have his committee members here to be able to discuss this matter. Kenny?
Thank you, MT. I want to give you an update, and we're also going to have a recommendation from the RFP committee today to bring to you. And before we go through that, one, I'd like to reiterate and kind of introduce who all was on remind everybody who all was on the RFP committee, and go through the timeline and the process a little bit, and then we'll talk about what the recommendation is. Just as a reminder, we originally started with 13 on the RFP committee. We did have one member who had to drop off for some personal reasons, things going on in their life. But we had 12 folks who went through the entire process. I'm just going to read these in alphabetical order by last name, but Paco Balderrama was one of the representatives from the task force. Joanne Davis from the task force. Grace Franklin, she's on both the city manager's working group and the mayor's task force. Reggie Hines from the task force. Ed Konieczny from the task force. Hope I didn't butcher that too bad. John Middendorf from the task force. Dexter Nelson from the task force. Paula Sophia Schonauer from the working group. Amy Simpson is the city's purchasing agent. So she's the head of purchasing and does all the purchasing and RFP work for the city. And she's one of the, we have to have at least 3 people from the city on these and so Paco, Amy Simpson, and myself were the 3 members from the city. Tim Tartabono, who's a member of both the working group and the task force. Dr. Valerie Thompson from the task force. And then again, myself, who I'm a member of both the working group and the task force. So we had a really large group. That's atypical for when a city does an RFP. We usually have maybe 3 or 4 people on the committee. But just to kind of give you an idea of the timeline, if you recall, this is something we started working on back in probably July and August, starting to put this together. If you remember, this group met on September the 3rd, and we had a session where we went through and kind of worked on the scope of services for this RFP. On September 10th, the city manager's working group also had a session where they reviewed the same scope of services and provided comments and suggestions, just like the mayor's task force. And then we put all that, incorporated it into the request for proposals, and that was approved by City Council on September the 15th. So it was out there available on the 16th, and proposers had until October the 7th to turn in a proposal. So we did receive 4 proposals, and the RFP committee reviewed. I think I said at a previous meeting, it was like 270 something pages of reading for everybody. Everybody reviewed those, scored them, and then everyone scored them independently. And prior to seeing everyone's scores, we got together, and I believe that was on the first part of November 5th, I believe. And, we had about a 2-hour plus meeting where we all shared our scores with each other. We debated it. We went through, we discussed, we asked questions, we clarified things. And at that point, the committee, really had a lot of discussion, but it was pretty clear that there were two proposals that separated themselves. And that was proposals from 21 CP and from Hillard Heinze were two groups. Both groups, very reputable groups, both groups that have done lots of work around the country. The decision was made to do final interviews with those two groups. So we did one interview on December the 1st and another interview on December the 4th. And I'll tell you, and prior to that, the committee also came up with a list of questions for each of the proposers. The same questions went to both proposers on a variety of topics. A lot of those were around, community engagement and around the experience and things of the different members of the firm. During the presentations, each one of those lasted more than 2 hours. So we got a presentation from each. We asked each group their various the questions, and then there's also just any other Q&A that happened as a result of things that were said in the proposal or in the presentations. So after those interviews, the committee met twice, 2 different times, and we all shared our views. We each scored the interviews and put in our votes. And I just got to tell you, we had a lot of robust debate and discussion, and there was lots of good points on both sides. And it was a very, very close discussion and a close vote. And as we talked about it, our recommendation that's coming to you as a larger group is to go with 21 CP Solutions as our consultant. 21 CP is a well-known group. Many of them started with, if you recall, during the Obama administration, President Obama put together a task force on 21st century policing. 3 of the people who were on our call were there in the room with him in the Oval Office. So they have a lot of experience in this area. They've got a lot of police experience, academic experience, union experience, civil rights experience, community engagement experience. And that's our recommendation to you. Our thought is we would like to bring this to you all today. We would like to bring it next week to the working group. And if approved, hopefully we would bring that forward to the city council for consideration, hopefully on December 22nd, so that we can get started with this project and get it moving. I'd like to also say that part of the discussion and the debate that we had, and this went even on into the night last night, and I really appreciate, you all should be very proud of these committee members that spent so many hours. And, we were here till about 7:15 last night, still debating and talking about it. And, one of the things that came out of that was a great suggestion, and I'm going to kind of throw some props to Joanne Davis, because this kind of came up from one of her ideas, but I think some of the folks on the RFP committee, I'm going to recommend that some of them serve also as sort of an oversight and advisory group for this contract. Really, we have our oversight things that are in place with the city, but some of the committee members express some desire, and I think it's a great idea to help the city manager's office as we manage this contract, to make sure that 21 CP is engaging the community in the right way, that the right people are involved, the right faces are there in front of the different segments of our community, the right language is being used, just really helping us and advising us that they're doing things the right way. We can always look at things and technically, legally check a box that a consultant's doing what they're supposed to be doing according to a contract, but we thought that was a very innovative and great idea to form an advisory group. So again, I really want to thank our committee members. It was a great cross-section of these two different groups, and I just cannot reiterate how much effort and time they had to put into this. I mean, we had multiple meetings, and our meetings were not short, and people showed up. I know everyone has jobs and organizations and other commitments, and I just felt like it was a really, really engaged group. There was lots of discussion, lots of debate. And so, you know, I don't know if there's any, our committee members who are here today, if there's any others that, anything else you'd like to share with the group about that. I know I talked last night that I want to make sure and give you all an opportunity, you know, if there are other comments or things, but at this point, I'll stop talking and let the committee members make any comments, or if the rest of the larger committee, if you have questions or thoughts you'd like to ask about. But that's what our recommendation is going to be to the larger group today.
Okay, any committee members have comments that they would like to make before we go to the larger group?
Chief Barry, this is Valerie Thompson with the Urban League. I just want to echo what Kenny said, that as committee members on this task force, the RFE committee, we really took our role very seriously and spent numerous hours and went through the RFP process with integrity. And at the end of the day, I can just say that like Kenny said, we debated, and the scores were close with the two final candidates. And so I want people to feel comfortable that this was not a process that was railroaded by the committee. We shared our views, our opinions. We even considered various options and things that may be like what ifs, to make sure that not only this larger task force will be served by the consultants, but also the small group. And so I love the idea of what Joanne Davis came up with as far as the oversight committee. I think it's going to be necessary to work with the staff on this, because this is very important work that we're engaging in, and we want to make sure that it's done correctly. So I just want the larger task force to know that we took our role very serious in getting this done for the task force.
Thank you, Valerie. Anyone else from the committee? If not, I'll move to the larger task force. Any comments, questions, concerns with the recommendation? Go ahead.
Yes, this is Cherie. I just have a question about, I guess I don't really need to know about attrition, but I just wondered what the vote number was, if that was documented between the two, if any of those on the committee would be willing to discuss why they voted for who they did.
Yeah, I'll just share really quick. The vote was 7-5, you know, so it was really close. The scores were really close, but so what we did was we looked at it two ways. We scored it, everybody gave them sort of on a 1 to 20 points. Basically, there were two criteria that we graded them from 1 to 10 on the presentation and 1 to 10 on how they answered our questions. And so we looked at both the average scores, but we also looked at how many picked one versus the other as their number one. But we did have a lot of discussion about, you know, could we support either one? And I think, you know, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think it was a pretty, most of us thought, you know, either one's pretty good and we could go with either. So with that, I'll be quiet and let the rest of the committee talk. Dexter, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say the vote was extremely close. Nobody went into this with any preconceived ideas or notions as to who we were going to end up with. Matter of fact, we had two votes, one before we met with the groups in person or via Zoom, and one after. We looked at them on paper. We voted, some of us voted one way, and then when we met with them on Zoom and talked to them and were able to ask questions, some of us changed our votes. So it was very close. Even though there are some well-known, recognized people on both of these groups, we kind of put that aside to look at the point as to whether or not they could actually do the work and how they would be able to handle dealing with Oklahoma City's community and police department. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that it was one-sided at all. Some of us went back and forth. It was a very spirited debate, and I think we can pretty much say we came out with the best group. Either one of these groups, I think, would have been good for us, but it came down to being so close, it just went to 21 CP.
Okay, thank you, Dexter. Anyone else? I don't see any hands raised on the automatic system. Any
so
other
this
comments?
is, this is Grace Franklin.
Okay, Grace.
I am one of the people who did vote. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I am one of the people who did vote for Hillard. And I think part of the discussion was, not that one was incapable. From my point of view, the choice was ability to engage the community, because task force that was looking at who engaged the communities, said it was close, but I felt it did have a better plan.
Grace, your audio.
We got to see them better at the.
Grace, can you hear me?
Did we lose her? She just left my screen.
Yeah, it looks like she dropped the call.
Okay.
I'll try to get her back on the line.
I can say, I think what Grace and I had a lot of discussions. I think what she was going to say was just she felt like Hillard was a little bit better suited at some of the community engagement aspects, and that's why she voted for them. But I don't want to put any more words in her mouth, but that's what I think she was trying to say. Any other committee members want to share? I think MT, was there somebody else that had a question?
No, I was just going to talk to Grace about
I see
her.
Garland's waving his hand.
He's not on my screen, so I don't see him.
Okay.
Can you unmute Garland?
You're muted, Garland.
There you go.
I see you got a date of December the 22nd. How soon will they be in place in order to function and do what needs to be done as far as the Central Policing concern?
Well, if approved and we get a contract negotiated with them, which, that's a lot of work to do in the next couple of weeks, and that's also the working group approves next week, we would have a contract with them. If council approves it on the 22nd, we could start on the 23rd, and now I'm sure people are going to be at Christmas and all. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be right at the first of the year. But that would be, we'd be ready to get them on the ground and get started just as soon as possible.
So Kenny, to Garland's point, you said next week you're going to the community policing working group.
Mm-hmm.
If they approve it, then we will be working with them to get it on council.
Mm-hmm.
Have they agreed? I mean, have they given us a time of how quickly they could be on the ground and be ready to go?
Yeah, I think they're ready to go. they're putting off other work and opportunities to see if they get this, and the folks who are going to work on our project, if chosen, this is really both firms. I think they're waiting to see if they're approved, and they've got their resources planned out to be able to start working just as soon as we get contracts in place. And a lot of that's going to be, you know, administrative work at first, trying to, you know, just get the lay of the land. But I think they're going to start wanting to have conversations with you all and other community members, you know, very, very soon, probably in January, I would imagine.
So none of the work at this point have already been in place, ready to be utilized. Basically, okay, we've got the company, get the contract together. With that in mind, I'm sure that there's already some past practice, well, something already in place concerning Century Police, because we've been looking at it for the last few years already. So basically, we will somewhat follow their criteria in some form and add to.
That would be my expectation, but you know, not having gone through this before, that's kind of what I think they're saying, is they've got a lot of things they've learned already. But you know, I think both groups were quick to say they got to come here to Oklahoma City and figure out what works best for us in our communities. There's not a cookie cutter you can apply to it. So,
but I think a lot of it has everything to do with universal policing, and so some of the implementations shouldn't take that much to put in place. As to we add to, like you say, every state, every city, town, or whatever is unique within itself, as to what we can implement in addition to what they bring to us. And the reason I asked the question for the urgency is based on us being number 2. We want to be number 22, 32, 42. And so the sooner, quicker, faster we get those things in place, the simpler we can implement something that's going to put us in that direction. That was the reason for the question. Implementation as soon as possible.
Hey, MT, I think I see Grace back on. I don't know, Grace, if you can hear, if you wanted to finish your thought. We kind of lost you in the middle of it. I see her name on the screen, but I don't know if she's back with us or not.
The interpreter has a question for Rachel Hollis when you have time.
Okay, go ahead.
So I was curious about 21CP. Do you know if they have any experience working with groups with disabilities or people who are deaf in general, people who have a different language? Have they had any experience working in communications with the police regarding those issues?
And if there's someone else on the committee that remembers, definitely the other languages. I mean, they do have, you know, they've worked with people with other languages. As far as the deaf, I cannot recall, and I apologize, I don't remember if we asked that question. If you'll give me a minute, I'm going to go back through really fast and try to look through to see if they mentioned anything about that in their proposal.
I think in addition to that, we're looking for that, we get ready to do a contract. We can make sure that we incorporate that, and then they make sure they address that. You know, we'll get that into the contract to make sure that they address that in the services they provide. And if we have to, we'll work with them through services here to help accommodate that.
Kenton, I don't recall that specifically, but both groups went to some length to say that they had the ability to reach out to all constituencies in one way or another. So, but we didn't ask that specific question.
Rachel mentions that it might be important to add that language, but also cultural awareness as well.
Yeah, I think both groups were very versed in cultural awareness, but I do apologize that we didn't ask, I don't think, or they didn't talk about specifically the hearing impaired issues.
Okay, I notice Valerie Thompson has her hand raised. Valerie?
Yes, I just want to make a comment on that, and I appreciate Rachel bringing up that that question. And I agree it should be written into the contract. One of the I guess the really spirited debates that we were having was around diversity and the ability of both of those organizations to work with certain groups. And I'll just share that I also voted with Hillard and not 21CP because I believe that Hillard had the stronger bench that could possibly work with different groups. However, in our discussions, the RFP committee felt that if we had the oversight committee, we could make sure that those things were happening and those things were written into the contract. So I do think we'll get there, but the oversight is going to be critical.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I see no other hands raised. Has anybody else have any comments?
I just want to preface my comments by saying I'd love to raise my hand on here. I don't see where to do that. So I don't want anyone to think I'm cutting in whenever I speak the way I do. I've never seen where I raise my hand. I'm so sorry. Thanks for the understanding. So hearing from the folk we just did about the cultural competency aspect, that's concerning to me. And I think that the oversight committee, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what Joanne and those who are advocating for it are hoping to see from it, particularly as it relates to cultural competency. You know, Ward 2, as you all know, is a very diverse part of the city. And so we're home to so many different communities, communities of color, whether they be Indigenous, Black, Asian. We have the 39th Street LGBT district, as you all know. And unfortunately, each one of those communities, nationally, locally, has an experience that is not so wonderful with law enforcement in terms of history. And so this is really fresh on my mind because just this week at council, as many of you probably already know, we approved very excitingly the construction contracting for the street enhancement project coming to our historic 39th Street district, home to both Route 66 and the last 40 years of OKC's LGBTQ history. But as I posted about that and was rereading, you know, the history of our LGBT community, very unfortunately, that involves some very bad moments with law enforcement. And I think any consultant who is going to be working with this group needs to have some sort of an awareness of that history. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to move forward in a healing, productive, restorative way. And I would apply that to any one of the other bit of communities that call Ward 2 and then ultimately OKC home. And I'm so sorry that some of what I just said might make some of us uncomfortable. Please know I'm sitting here in uncomfort talking it aloud, but we must name it if we're going to move forward. And again, as I said, in a healing, productive, restorative way. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about what this oversight board would do to make sure that historically marginalized communities, what are we going to do? What does that look like? What is that committee's responsibilities? What can we do in terms of the contract to make sure that that conversation is ongoing? Because if we don't have the trust of these communities, no matter what we put forth as a group to council to pass, it'll be for naught.
And Councilman, I don't have the full group set up yet. You know, we're still working on volunteers, but I know, I believe Dr. Thompson, you volunteered, and Paula Sophia from the working group has volunteered to be on it. Mr. Middendorf has volunteered. And forgive me if I don't remember who else volunteered last night, but we had several of our RFP committee, and we'll be putting that together as well. But with that being said, Dr. Thompson or others, is there anything you'd like to say about that? To answer his question about what it is you would be providing and helping us with. We're still kind of working this out, but.
This is Joanne. Yeah, we have to work it out based on what the resultant contract is going to be. And based on my own experience with contracting, it really is the contract and the oversight, because you've already heard from the others. Our issues were pertaining to the various things that you're talking about. And Hillard gave some of us, a good part of us, a greater feel for that. But since 21CP is the ultimate contract awardee, it will be up to the city to determine how we're going to do the oversight so that we can ensure that those specific areas that you've spoken to and that Rachel has spoken to and that we all are sensitive to are addressed in the performance of the contract. And I would hope that the oversight committee would have the ability to go back to Kenny and the rest to say, we're not comfortable with their performance. They're not doing what we think is necessary. And then at that point, again, it's a contract. It may become a legal issue regarding lack of performance in what we determine is best for the city. I'm not sure that answered your question, but that's kind of what I envision it to be. But again, the city made that decision.
I have follow a little bit was Councilman, it's things like, are we using the right language? Do we have the right faces in front of the different groups we may be communicating with? Are we engaging in the right way? And I see Grace is back on, so if you'd like to jump in too, feel free.
Yes. Can everybody hear me now? Am I better? Okay. So what I was saying initially, and I'll keep it in the same vein, is part of the robust discussion that we had was some of us felt like the community engagement portion that based on the interview. So when we got to the interview process, some of us felt like Hillard would have a better result. The language that they used, the experience they talked about, in regards to getting trust within the communities that we're trying to get information from was very important, because we are going to be talking about going into communities where people are disenfranchised. So we're not just talking about race, we're talking about socioeconomic situations. We're talking about mental health issues. We're talking about getting information from some of our citizens who are unsheltered. So that was part of the robust discussion, was that some of us felt like Hillard may be a little more apt to that. That's not to say that 21 is incapable or less than. We were just talking about what we felt would be most probable for both groups, which was one of the things we discussed. Well, I brought up consistently, which was, we're not talking about just the larger task force and those two items, but also the smaller group, which has 6 things to implement. So I think with the idea of the oversight committee, as Joanne was talking about, what we will be doing is just making sure everybody has access and we are getting the information that we would need. And it is a working process because the idea was just brought up yesterday. And I think for me, as a person who voted, for on the other side for different reasons, I think a oversight committee for either organization, whichever consultant ended up on top, would be best, because we are talking about a lot of information. We need to make sure that we are getting it from the groups that we need to. So I'm very comfortable with the idea and very excited about the idea of a review committee or an oversight committee that would be making sure that 21 is doing everything, all these things that we're going to need them to do. But I did want to make sure that everybody on this task force understood that it wasn't that it really was a discussion, and it was tight, because again, these are two consulting firms that are capable. We were just, and this is what we have, which is fine. We just want to make sure that the end result and the community impact and access is there. And we're talking about all communities, especially disenfranchised, which includes, just as James, as Councilman Cooper was talking about, we just need to make sure. And I think the oversight committee, the idea of that, the structuring of that is important. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Grace. Now I've got about 4 hands raised, so I'd like to go to the next one in line. Sarah Adams Cornell.
Mr. Berry, would you mind if I commented on the contracting process real quick?
Go right ahead. Who is this?
I'm Amanda Carpenter. I'm with the Municipal Counselor's Office. I will be working with staff to draft this contract. So I wanted to give you guys a heads up and information on how we do this process. So what we do when we went through the RFP process is we provide a template of what a contract may look like. But as we go through the RFP selection process, and this discussion is very helpful, as Ms. Davis has pointed out, Ms. Franklin has pointed out, we will be able to include some of the things that you had as desires from the other candidate into this contract to make it a requirement, to make it a something that we are asking this candidate and this contractor to perform as part of their contractual obligation. And then, as Ms. Davis pointed out, it then becomes a, have you fulfilled your contract? Are you doing the outreach like we've requested? Since you have specific desires from what you've learned through the RFP process, we can write that into the contract. So then we have a review process, which could be this committee. And then you also have the further step of, are you meeting the legal requirements of your contract? So just so you know, a lot of this will be incorporated in the contract. I believe that the basics of the contracts, what we usually refer to as a term sheet, will come back to this group. So you all are aware of what ends up in that contract. And then council actually approves that contract. And we move forward right off the bat with a plan on how to accomplish what tasks it is that you all are requesting. So I hope that provides a little bit more information, makes you all feel more comfortable that we are hearing you. We are able to incorporate a lot of this on the front end rather than having to do this double check and make sure that they're doing what it is you've asked for.
Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate that. Sarah Adams Cornell.
Thank you. And Councilman Cooper, I appreciate what you said, and we should never have to apologize for making people uncomfortable. We need to get more uncomfortable. I would also like to just mention or ask really, is the consulting firm, is this 21CP, are they led by people of color or disenfranchised people? Will they be the ones doing the majority of the work in our communities?
So that's part of what, that's one of the requirements that we looked at is, and that was one of the difficulties is with both, we asked, give us an estimate of how much time each of the different members are going to spend. And I think both groups put, had 1 or 2 people that had a lot of time, but they were the people who were more doing the report writing, the scheduling, that kind of stuff. And then they allocated portions of time to different folks. Both groups had persons of color who were allocated time, and I think there were concerns from members with both Hillard and both 21CP that they didn't have enough time allocated to certain individuals. And so that was what a lot of the discussion was around. That's a lot of what we had discussions about, putting as a guarantee that we control who is in front of our communities and who is spending the time. And both of them have, if you go to each of their websites and look at their, who's on there, and it's Hillard Heinze or 21CP Solutions, just look at who they've got, on their team. And there's various folks of various backgrounds, various demographics, various areas of expertise, and they have, both of them have a very deep bench to pull from. They have, each of them have, a set of primary people that they have allocated to us. And, you know, those allocations, in my opinion, were very similar. You know, one of my concerns was I did not see somebody from our Hispanic community on Hillard, but there was somebody on the call with us from 21CP, and that's a major part of our city. Now, does Hillard not have anybody from that community? I doubt it. I'm sure they have lots of folks who could fill that role. You know, but both of them had African-American individuals. Hillard had access to somebody from the Asian community. You know, so there were some differences on both sides. And, you know, we talked about LGBTQ issues with Hillard. That question did not get asked with 21CP. However, Paula Sophia mentioned that she had done some work with 21CP on some videos and other things that they were making for that. And she said that was like 4 or 5 years ago. So I think, you know, both of these are going to have, in my opinion, are going to have access to whoever we want to. We just need to make sure we put in our contract that we're in control of that. And if we're not happy with who's out there, we can force them to bring somebody else. And that's really part of what we're envisioning the oversight group does, is they help us go, you know, because I don't understand every community and what their needs are and what their words are that they're comfortable with and what the faces need to be. And that's where the oversight committee can say, hey, you know what? I don't think that person's a good fit. They're not going to communicate well with this community or that community. You know, let's get somebody.
We do also have to be very careful. We're making these decisions based on their abilities. We're not making the decisions based on a racial makeup. This is a consultant who's put forth what their abilities are, and we want them to be represented and representative of our community, and so that they can have the ability to communicate with our different aspects and groups of the community. But we aren't, that wasn't a factor that we could make a decision on. That wasn't a scored factor, the racial makeup of the team. So we do have to be careful as we go forward in talking about our selection of what the makeup and what the scoring factors were.
But I would categorize that as it's making sure we have folks who are able to effectively communicate with the communities that they're interfacing with.
Right, their abilities.
Okay, next hand raised is Pastor John Middendorf.
Yes, thank you, Chief. I want to answer Councilman Cooper's question, at least from my point of view. I think it's a good question. I think one of the things I found gratifying was that 21CP had done some homework on us, and as a part of their presentation, they referenced some things in our recent history, like the Breaking Bread event, that demonstrate for them that the city does have an appetite for this kind of conversation and does have an appetite to access communities of color and communities that have been disenfranchised. It was meaningful to me that when they showed up for the interview, albeit on Zoom, they did have a Latino face as well as an African-American face there. And I think that was representative of the way that they're going to try to reach in broadly. So I do think that they will come and be responsive to anything that we have to say that has to do with those painful chapters in our history. That at least is the impression that I have gotten thus far, and have every reason to believe that if we could collect these stories and put them in their hands ahead of time, that they would be grateful and would feel like that they could be more prepared for what it is they're coming to do here on the ground.
Thank you. Next hand raised is Pastor Cherie Dickerson.
Thank you so much. So I have a couple of questions, kind of a follow-up. So when we hear that who was presented on the Zoom calls, I began to wonder whether or not it was, because being a woman who is queer, who identifies as gender fluid, also African American and Indigenous, I know that we say we do not make our decisions based on the racial makeup, but it's important if we're trying for inclusion and diversity, because those are the communities that are being impacted. And one of the reasons why this actual task force was literally even brought to the table for this. So were any questions to either of the finalists, I'll call them, asked? Because I don't ever want it to seem more like, okay, so yes, they brought people of color to the table. Was that more about inclusion or tokenism? Also, did any of the discussion, did they ever say that their intent or one of the things that they wanted to focus on more was the reduction in loss of life in interactions with OCPD or other law enforcement agencies, as well as did we ask any questions for these companies, like if they were part of any litigation from former partners or those who were contributors to their policy and the makeup of what their presentations are, as far as have they been hit with discrimination allegations, or have there been settlements? I'd be interested to find out about that history.
Yeah, I don't think we asked any questions about litigation or things like that. We really asked about a lot of, tell us about your, I mean, a lot of it was around, tell us about your firm, the capabilities, your experience, tell us about the people individually who you would assign to this and what they've worked with. Tell us about some of the other cities or projects you've worked on. And then we asked a lot of questions about community engagement. And again, we didn't necessarily focus that on a particular segment of our community. It was, tell us about who you think's important to talk to. How do you figure out who's important to talk to? How do you engage these? You know, how do you engage the members of our task force? How do you engage the police department? You know, it was more general about the methodologies and how they've done this before in other cities.
Okay, the next hand that I have raised is Ed Koninsky.
Thank you, MT. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. One for Pastor Dickinson. Both of the groups were very conscious and aware of, from our RFP, of the things we were trying to accomplish, especially around the de-escalation and other things. It was, they were very in touch with what was going on and where we were trying to go with that. But we, unfortunately, our first presentation was from 21CP, and unfortunately, a couple of our members were not available. I wish they had been, because the questions they asked were very important. And one of the questions asked of Hillard Heinz that we didn't specifically ask 21CP was around some of the diversity, LGBTQ and others. That led to a very detailed and robust conversation with their engagement people around those various types of things. So we actually got a lot more from them, but we also got kind of a diversity response from 21CP, just not as specific, because that particular question hadn't been asked. I wish we could have gone back and actually asked them that question to hear, so we can compare a little bit more. But both of them were very much aware of the various constituencies we have in Oklahoma, and had a lot of ideas and ways in which to engage people and to get outside the box, instead of just doing surveys, but doing the extra to find people and engaging them and bringing them into the process.
Thanks, Ed. The next hand I have is Dexter Nelson.
Thanks, Chief. I just wanted to reiterate, you know, we took this very serious. No one on any one of these particular groups got a pass because of who they were, what color they were, their race, or anything like that. We looked specifically at their abilities. Yes, we did consider that everyone that was involved in both groups would have the ability to you know, understand racially, the makeup of Oklahoma City, understand things from a different perspective, being of a certain race, a certain gender or such. But we looked specifically at their abilities to be able to do the job, their abilities to be able to communicate with the citizens in the different groups of Oklahoma City, and their ability to be able to work with the police department and the police union. So yeah, we considered a lot of the things that you all are talking about. But as Amanda will tell you, you can't go on racial makeup and gender and that sort of thing as to the members of a group. We looked at their ability to be able to understand those things and to be able to comprehend the problems that we have surrounding those areas. But we specifically focused on their abilities to be able to do the job.
Okay. Thanks, Dexter. Next hand I have raised is Joshua Higginbotham.
Yeah, so I understand the the issues with not being able to go with one particular race or not, and so I want to go with just numbers here. Did anyone ask what the rate of officer-involved shootings afterward was as opposed to before the consultancy came in and actually gave training and did what they did? Was there a reduction? Anybody ask about that? Number one, and I guess number two, was there a significant difference among the consultancies based on that number?
No, Joshua, we didn't ask something that specific. I mean, a lot of their engagements were very different. A lot of them were, similar to what we're doing. A lot of them were different. But we didn't ask something like that was, statistically based.
Hand I have raised is Dexter Nelson.
And along those lines, what we did look at was after these companies came through and dealt with an agency, whether or not, and we're still looking at this and we're still considering it, did they progress? And we know that not all of the agencies that they dealt with implemented all of the recommendations that they made. And that was more than likely because they couldn't get them past their unions. So that was another thing that we considered. Just because they came in and made recommendations and worked with an agency doesn't mean the agency did everything that organization asked them to do. So that's kind of a difficult thing to gauge as to whether or not a department improved after they dealt with one of these agencies, because they may not have implemented all of the recommendations.
Good point, Dexter. Thanks you. Okay. Are we ready to make I think the recommendation coming to us, Joshua, you're back up again?
Yeah. So what I wanted to know then is, how are we going to measure progress, as Mr. Nelson said? And if we can't actually compare how progress was measured in other instances, aren't we just sort of like somewhat throwing money blindly at the problem?
Well, Josh, I would say that that's part of what some of the very first conversations we're going to have with these consultants are going to be. And that's part of what they're going to be asking you all, other members of the community, is what is it? What are the issues? What are some of the ideas to solve those? They're going to bring best practices, but it's going to be, how do we measure that? And a lot of where Dexter was talking about is they're going to bring, okay, here's an implementation plan. These are the things you need to do. These are the milestones you need to accomplish. And just like with anything, we're going to have to measure it and watch it. And if things don't change, you adjust. I mean, that's something, but again, I think that's something they're going to be engaging you all about through this process.
Valerie Thompson's hand is raised.
I just want to follow up, and I know we've been spending quite a bit of time talking about the diversity issue, but another issue that came up in our spirited debate was on how do we measure things, the quantitative, not just the quantitative and qualitative analysis that we'll need in order to make some substantial changes in our city. And I brought this brought this question up several times to make sure that both consultants had the ability to produce the documentation that we needed, the benchmarks that we needed in order to see progress going forward. So I don't want anybody to think that we're just hiring consultants, the city's hiring consultants, they're gonna write a report and we're just gonna move down the road. One of the things that I was advocating for early on is how do we measure, how are they gonna gather data, and how are they gonna analyze the data, both quantitatively and qualitatively through this process.
Thank you, Valerie. With that being said, Garland, I see your hand raised.
Yes. Statistic, what they call it, random sampling as far as being able to deal with data. But I guess what my concern is, if we already know those particular areas in which they did not implement that ended up being an issue or a concern for progress, we'd like for them to provide us with those, because those sound like would be the areas that are going to be most needed in order for change to happen, for us to see the change that we're looking for. If they've already been provided with, say, these particulars were implemented, these particular were not, these particular was concerns, these were not adopted, we need to see what those particulars were as to the reason behind not being able to see what change that we need here at the city.
Yes, sir. That was one of the things I think Dexter was alluding to, but one of the specific questions we asked about were, you know, what were some of the reasons why things didn't get implemented, or what were some of the challenges you've run into? And, you know, I think we got some good feedback from both of them. And those are things that may or may not be issues in Oklahoma City, but definitely I think they have that information.
Yeah,
from
we need a list. We need a list of those, because I would think those would be considered the roadblocks or stumbling blocks would hinder what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Garland. Ed Kaninsky.
Yeah, thank you, Garland, for that. I just wanted to add to what Kenny said. We asked them very specifically if they ever had any failures in their consulting practices and who they've worked with. Both of them gave us information about groups that they had worked with where some things had not been implemented, but it was not because of the group or the consultants. They were decisions based on the city and the department, which related to maybe budgetary items, contractual issues that have to be worked out with the FOP or others, and those kinds of things. It was not, there was never a situation, at least that I recall, and maybe Dr. Thompson can weigh in, where they said that there was a failure because of something that they did as consultants. And there was always something behind it that made it an obstacle, or that it was, they had so many to do, they were taking them a little bit at a time as they were going forward. So we really did try to dig into that as to where were the issues with them in the past, that they maybe not accomplished everything, or the organization that they were working for didn't accomplish everything, and why that happened.
Thanks, Ed. Next hand up is Councilman Cooper.
He learns, I figured it out. Thanks to the city manager. So and this might be a question for Amanda, maybe Kenny. When would we, so I have a couple questions. When would we when does the contract moment happen so that we're all able to make sure that some of the elements folk have raised today are part of that, that process?
We were hoping, if the task force approves today, and I believe we've tried to set a working group meeting for next Tuesday, I believe, and we would like to do the same presentation to that group. And if both groups were good with moving forward, then we would bring this to you, City Council, on the 22nd. And that's a very tight timeline, admittedly, but that's assuming we can get all these contracts and points negotiated with 21CP. You know, obviously, if there became an issue or something, we were, you know, dealing with, but you know, hopefully we could, that's the plans. We bring it to you on December 22nd and do a presentation and bring that contract to you on the, to the council as a whole on the 22nd.
But thanks, Kenny. So next Tuesday, you're hoping to get the selection committee and or this whole group back together? Or?
No, I'm sorry, the city managers working group. That's the next meeting for that group. So
yes,
so that way we just wanted to make sure both the mayor's law enforcement policy task force and the city managers community policing working group, that both bodies were able to hear this same, you know, presentation and get feedback from their members that were on the RFP committee. So for example, Grace, Tim, myself, and who am I leaving out? That are all on, that are on both groups would.
Dexter's on the other one too, isn't he?
No, I think it's just Tim, myself, and Grace, but then Paula Sophia Schonauer is on that working group, and she was on the RFP committee. We would like to do the same presentation to that group and make sure that they're okay moving forward with 21CP as well for their consultant.
So then between next Tuesday and the following Tuesday of council, we're hoping to reconvene.
We're hoping, no, we're between that time, we're hoping to complete the contract and have those discussions. They were given both groups were giving a, as we do in RFPs, they were given a template contract, you know, that's kind of the base items. Then it's things like what we're discussing today that Amanda, who's smiling because she knows how much late night work she's going to have from this, will then be working with 21CP. If approved, we would be working with them very quickly to try to put these other clauses that we've talked about, you know, like the control clauses about who's there and, you know, negotiating the final pricing structure and all those things that we've talked about. But you know, a lot of that's already set in that we've got our scope of services, but there's just all those different points of a contract you have to go negotiate and get in place so that we can bring it to you on the 22nd.
Okay, so in other words, right now today is the moment where the things that this group would like to see become part of that contract, we need to say them so that our good friend Amanda, excuse me, is able to put them in the contract. Is that right?
Yeah, and I would say that that's correct. You know, the bulk of it's going to be around what the original scope of services that we asked about. We would also build language about, you know, additional services. You know, I know there were many other topics you yourself were interested in, other members were interested in. So we would need to build language in about what happens if we discover, you know, another issue or an underlying issue or something else we need to deal with. So there's things like that that we would need to build in. But yes, if there are any other major points that we need to put in, now's the time to share those with us.
Well, and Councilman Cooper, I'll be able to take the notes from the RFP process and what the discussion was last night about the review committee and what those aspects were that they liked about the second option and incorporate those into a contract for this option. So that has already been communicated and we can incorporate that in, not a problem.
So, yeah, I mean, honestly, the concerns I heard from Valerie and Grace, I share those. So I'm glad to hear that would be incorporated into that. Had something else. Oh, to the folk, because this will help me in being comfortable with 21C. The folk who chose the other group, and I heard Grace seem to, with the caveats that she listed, seem to give her blessing. It'll help me feel more comfortable hearing from those folk. Like if we feel this is, if the folk who had those concerns, if they feel that with these caveats moving forward, feel that if this is, you know, their will too, then that helps me be more comfortable. And I guess they don't have to say, but if they do feel comfortable saying, then I'd appreciate that. if that's an appropriate question to ask. If it's not, strike it, never mind.
Okay, the next hand that I have raised is Cherie Dickerson.
I just wanted to follow up. I think two statements that I heard. One,
Cherie, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Just barely.
Let's see. How about now?
Now, yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I wanted to follow up. I just wanted to make sure that I was interpreting things correctly. Something that Chief Nelson said and someone else also brought it up was when you were asking both entities about the progress or the success, or if they had failures, did they seem to indicate that some of the a majority of the reason why their suggestions or recommendations were not implemented was because of the response from the police unions in that being possible? So is that what impeded the implementation? Or was that their particular views?
If I could, that was one of the reasons why they said some of the recommendations that they made had not been accepted by departments that they've worked with. There were a variety of other reasons, but that was one of the major reasons why they said sometimes things don't get implemented. They just make the recommendation of implementation. It still has to be accepted by the cities and the departments.
Yeah, there were the FOP issues in the various locations, but there was also budgetary items, and not all the FOP issues were negative. It just required a redo of their contracts with the city, and that process is not something it had to be accomplished on both sides, the city and the police department.
Yeah, I think if I could sum up probably the three reasons. I mean, there were contractual or legal reasons, there were budgetary reasons, and then just I think they said it different ways. One I think used the word commitment, but I think what they're saying is you still have to get politically so a lot of these are policy things that have to be voted in or something like that, and that varies from city to city, as you can imagine. I do want to make sure I want to make sure we had Councilman Cooper, I don't know if we answered your question previously. I think you asked maybe from Grace or Dr. Thompson or others that if they still felt comfortable moving forward, that's what you wanted to hear. And I'm under that impression, but I need them to answer that to you.
Yes, and we've got both Joanne Davis and Valerie Thompson both have their hands raised.
I'm sorry.
Why don't we jump up to Joanne Davis right quick and see.
Okay. When you, in this situation with a service type requirement, and as you evaluate, you're going to have these differences, and it just boils down to, did each person or company that proposed, were they acceptable technically? And that's just kind of how I thought of it, having experienced this on the federal government side. So if they were technically acceptable, and both were, I still had some reservations about the diverse communities and how you meet them where they are with 21CP versus Hillard. Do I think 21CP is capable? The answer is yes. And one of the reasons why I said, well, if we had some community oversight in how they approached our various communities, would that make it better for all of us to accept 21CP, knowing that they may not have been the stronger candidate on that side of it, if that makes sense to you. And so what we're looking for, and of course you have to go within the guidelines of what the city does and city's rules, but the purpose really of the oversight is to ensure that these areas in which we weren't comfortable with 21CP, that we ensure that they're meeting those various elements as much as we can within the confines of the perimeters of the contract. And so that's my hope and desire, that once we flesh out how we're going to work it, that at the end of the day, that we have some inroads to how they do it and what they're accomplishing along the way, so that we don't get to the end and get nothing.
Thank you, Joanne. Valerie Thompson?
Yes, I think Joanne said it all, Councilman Cooper. Again, I echo exactly what she was saying. And just to let you know, those issues that you raised, we raised the similar issues and looked at them, and very similar with both of the organizations. Technically, can they do it? Yes. Did one company give us a better feel that they could do it better? Yes. However, at the end of the day, the committee voted for 21CP. I think the oversight committee, again, I'll reiterate, is going to be extremely critical and valuable for this process, so that if we don't go to the end and say, well, we didn't get what we anticipated, we can look at every step of the way to make sure that all of our community, all of our aspects of our community is represented.
Next hand I have raised is Craig Freeman.
Thanks, MT. I just wanted to jump in with what Valerie and Joanne were talking about, that I really, the insight to suggest that, one, I think it's something outside of what we normally do with the city, with a contract. It's management's responsibility to manage a contract, but it's outside of what we normally do. But given the circumstances that we're in right now, and especially the challenges that the committee was having, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think it's a great way for me, for us as managers, to be able to have a team working with us, helping to provide this oversight and additional sets of eyes from various perspectives. I think it's going to add a lot of value to this contract and the way it's implemented.
Tim Tortibono.
Thank you. I was on the committee, and I wanted to thank Dr. Thompson and Ms. Franklin and Ms. Davis for their comments, because I think they're exactly right. It was a very robust conversation. There was clearly, both of them recognized the need to address diversity in our marginalized communities. And it was just, I think, a matter of degree. But as we were talking, I went back over my notes, and two or three of them just quickly that I wanted to point out from 21CP's presentation, which to me was much stronger. We are outside consultants, so we have to find your leaders, especially those that are marginalized. Our job is to find the voices that you need to be amplified. And then the famous police chief, Charles Ramsey, who was there with Obama during the 21 first century policing, I thought this was an important thing. He said, need to connect with and talk to your high risk and at-risk youth of color. So each of those things, I just felt they were sensitive and aware of that. And my takeaway from the conversation is that we were really arguing about degrees of that. And so that's what, 21CP was just a little bit ahead. But again, I'd say it was very close. And I think with this oversight committee and that sensitivity that we have based on the conversations we've been having, I think as long as Amanda and Kenny can do a good job of putting those requirements in there, which I'm sure they can, I think we'll be able to have something that the oversight committee can really hold them accountable and make sure they're being transparent about their efforts in that respect.
Thank you, Tim. Councilman Cooper.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for those comments. It's very helpful. It's helpful. And then I feel like from the interpreter, this is something that Amanda, you probably already made a note of, but yeah, when I think of marginalized and underrepresented communities, disenfranchised communities, I definitely think of those with differing abilities, whether it be folk who, need to move around our city differently in terms of wheelchairs, motorized scooters, stuff like that, but people who might have different hearing abilities and speaking abilities. So that would be something that's very much always on my mind as well. And just making sure that we can make those interactions between those folk and law enforcement as productive as possible and safe. So that would be the other thing I would add in addition to normally thinking about folk of color and LGBTQ, et cetera. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, we've heard a lot, we've discussed a lot. Are we ready to move forward? Not hearing any objection, I think we will move forward then with our consultant selection, 21CP, and follow the path that Kenny has laid out for us.
And MT, I'd just like to once again, thank you everyone who is on the committee. I mean, your hard work, I think this is the most major step we have towards this project we're working together. So I really, really appreciate everybody that spent all that time. So thank you.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank to your committee for all your hard work on this issue. We appreciate it. Okay, next item on our agenda is the OKCPD Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies Incorporated, a update presentation on CALEA. And who was going to do that?
That'd be me, sir.
Heather Durham with the police department.
Oh, where is she? I don't see her on my, oh, there you are. Hi, Heather.
Hello.
Sorry about that. Okay, go right ahead.
Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Lieutenant Heather Durham with the Oklahoma City Police Department, and I am our department's CALEA Accreditation Manager. Today, I'm going to talk about the CALEA accreditation process and what it means to our department and to our city. Like hospitals, schools, law enforcement also has accrediting bodies. Our accrediting body is called CALEA. CALEA is considered the gold standard in public safety. The Oklahoma City Police Department began researching CALEA accreditation around 2001, thanks to the leadership of then Chief M.T. Berry. We continued the accreditation process with former Chief Bill City, where we received our initial accreditation in March of 2007. In March of 2020, we received our most recent accreditation award with Chief Wade Gorley. CALEA was created in 1979 as a credentialing authority through the joint efforts of law enforcement's major executive association. Those are the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the National Sheriff's Association, and the Police Executive Research Forum. So what is accreditation? CALEA accreditation is a voluntary set of professional standards that we meet and strive to exceed. Accreditation requires comprehensive uniform written directives that clearly define authority, performance, and responsibility. And what happens with this program is every year an assessor from outside of our organization and outside of our region review all of our written directives, our policies, procedures, and they also review our proofs of compliance. On the fourth year of the accreditation cycle, a team of assessors come to Oklahoma City and not only visit our police department, but they conduct interviews with our employees and citizens of the city of Oklahoma City. At the completion of the on-site review, a report is generated and sent to the CALEA commissioners for the final decision on whether our agency is going to be accredited or not. The commission is composed of 21 individuals from all over the nation. Half of the commissioners are law enforcement executives, and the other half come from the private sector, from colleges, they're everything from college professors, attorneys, business owners, local and state leaders, and we even have state Supreme Court judges that are on our commission. So what are the benefits of a police department being accredited? Accreditation provides our chief with a proven management system of written directives, required training standards, and reports that supports decision-making and resource allocation. The idea of police accreditation embodies community-oriented policing. As a matter of fact, the most recent on-site that we had, the team leader recognized our department as being, he had done over 50 inspections of a police department, and he recognized our department as being one of the highest standard departments in our community-based policing that he had seen in a very long time, and he commended us on that in our report. We have a set of standards that are continuously under review. Like I mentioned earlier, they review us annually to look at all of our directives. And that review helps us stay relevant and current with trends and patterns on a nationwide basis in law enforcement. It also holds not only us accountable, and it holds us transparent to our community and our citizens and our own law enforcement partners. Currently, CALEA has about 1,075 clients nationwide. They also have agencies that they accredit in Mexico and Canada, but that is not included in this number. The Oklahoma City Police Department is one of only 15 nationwide police departments with over 1,000 employees that have achieved advanced accreditation status through CALEA. The reason that we are one of only 15 agencies accredited in the entire country is that it is very, very difficult for agencies with over 1,000 employees to comply with the required 459 standards. In May 2015, the final report of the Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing was released. And with that release of the report, CALEA, recognizing that we need to stay relevant and review our own standards, they began a review of their standards manual. In 2017, CALEA released an updated edition of the law enforcement standards that exceeded the task force recommendations on 21st century policing. In March of 2020, the Oklahoma City Police Department was accredited under the CALEA standards and is continuously reviewing our written directives to maintain that compliance. Within the 21st Century Policing Report, there are 6 fundamental pillars that contain recommendations for law enforcement agencies. The Oklahoma City Police Department currently meets those recommendations of the report through applicable CALEA standards. In addition to meeting the minimum standards, we at the Oklahoma City Police Department strive to exceed those standards through innovative programs and practices. The first pillar, and I'm going to go quickly over the 6 pillars in case there's anyone on the board that's not familiar with them. Pillar 1 of the 21st Century Policing Report is building trust and legitimacy within the community and the police department. And some of the things the Oklahoma City Police Department does to build that trust and legitimacy is we produce reports monthly, quarterly, and annually that we give to our chief that he can review and utilize those to make the best decision possible for him, for the police department, and our community. We also have a process in place to notify citizens of a complaint finding. If they were to file a formal complaint against one of our officers, they're notified of the findings, whether it was founded or unfounded results. We do submit an annual survey in conjunction with the City of Oklahoma City that includes opinions on the police department. We also provide demographic tables as a result of our CALEA accreditation that are generated based on all police applicants, new hires, and our promotions. The second pillar is over policy and oversight. And this does not include all of our directives. Obviously, we have an entire operations manual. I just hit on some of the highlights that we have for some of our best practices. So we do have directives on a use of force. We've had a de-escalation policy in place for a few years now. We have an extensive search of prisoners procedure. We have procedures on bias-based policing, on non-discrimination, on police-citizen encounters. We also do, one of the policy and oversight details that they were talking about was joint policing and stuff like that with other agencies. We have joint training with fire, EMSA on our active threat response. We have a citizens advisory board, and we also make our operations manual available to the public online for anybody to view at their choosing. The third pillar of 21st century policing is technology and social media. A few years ago, we implemented body-worn cameras. And one of the things that the pillars talk about is the maintaining civil and human rights. And the way that we're able to do that is that we actually have audits within our body-worn camera that supervisors take a look at and make sure that our officers are randomly abiding by our directives. We also have guidelines on when the officers are required to activate and deactivate those cameras based on if they're in a hospital or in a private setting where they're not wanting to show juveniles or sensitive nature things. One of the other things on this pillar was social media. We have a very active social media section in our police department. We try to engage our public as much as possible and notify them of any and everything that we can to make it a better interaction with them. Some of the things that we put on social media are a uniform change. When we went to trying out external vest carriers, we wanted to let the public know that these were coming so they weren't surprised when they saw an officer that didn't look like what they normally saw our uniforms looking like. Or when we changed our vehicles, we did the same thing. But we also put stuff out on community interactions. So if we're hosting a trunk or treat or a Jam and Hoops Fest or anything like that, then we want the public to know that as well. The fourth pillar is community policing and crime reduction. And like I mentioned before, the team assessor said we did a really good job in reaching out to our community and our community events. But some of the other things for the multidisciplinary approach to meet this pillar that we exceed in that is our Palomar Family Justice Center and our Care Center. We also are we are partnered with the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health. And one of the things that we recently started was our iPad program. What this is when a patrol officer, one of our crisis intervention team officers has a mental health consumer that they come into contact with, they have this device that they can immediately get that person into contact with a medical provider and get them the help they need on scene instead of having to wait and transport them when it may make them more uncomfortable, when they may just need to speak directly with a medical provider. We also have police community relation officers, PAL, our Police Athletic League, which is heavily involved in the community, and our FACT units. And these are dedicated units that create positive interactions with the juveniles and police, and they learn the needs of the community in which that we all live in. The fifth pillar is training and education. And one of the things that we've implemented in the last few years is a local company called Strata. It's a Strata leadership class, and all our supervisors are required to take it. We also developed a procedural justice mindset for our department, and it's one of our philosophical views that we've embedded in the culture of our department. We have quarterly in-service training for all of our sworn officers. We also recently developed a new mentor program for new supervisors, as well as investigators that are going into the investigative bureau that had not been there before. We, as a result of our training and stuff with our with our training, we also have been doing cultural and bias training to include local history, and that's implemented in our academy and into our annual in-service training as well. And the final pillar is pillar 6, which is officer wellness and safety. So a couple of things that they talk about on here is adopting policies requiring officers to wear seat belts and body armor. And we get approximately 96 hours of driving training in our police academy, as well as every other year we go to updated training for driving. We also have policies to require officers to wear safety belts anytime they're in a city vehicle. And the department provides ballistic vests for all our officers, and those are replaced every 5 years based on manufacturer's recommendations. Every single one of our officers are trained in first aid trauma care, and they are provided a first aid trauma kit that includes tourniquets, chest shields, and bandages. That way we can provide that training or that aid to citizens if we're the first ones on scene prior to a fire department or IMSA. And one of the other things that we have created on our department in last year in 2019 was a wellness unit. And that's based on one of the recommendations of an independent survey that we did that recommended this unit to help officers to deal with the job stressors that we see every day. In summary, we try to set ourselves apart from the other 12,000 municipal police departments nationwide by holding ourselves to a higher standard. Not only do we do this for ourselves, but we do this for the citizens of Oklahoma City. And that is why we are one of only 15 agencies our size that have maintained accreditation status through CALEA for the last 13 years. And on the screen, you can see the dates that we've had our awards, and any information that you guys would like to read, if there's anything else you'd like to see on CLIA, may be found at clia.org.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it very much. Now, do we have any questions for Heather? Raise your hands, please. Heather, would you remove your slide? I see a hand raised from Valerie Thompson.
Yes, Chief Bear, I was wondering if the task force could get a copy of that presentation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Has Chief Gorley made it with us yet? He is?
Yes, sir. He is on.
Okay. Are we ready to go back into item number 2?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So Chief Gorley and I wanted to have a chance to visit with the task force and just, recognize the reality of the situation that we're in right now with recent incidents and not ignore that. I wanted to mention my appreciation to Heather for her presentation. And us showing this on CLIA isn't to say that we've got everything figured out. This is something that started many years ago. As she had mentioned, MT got it started. Chief City was the chief at the time when we first got our accreditation. And now Chief Gorley, we've been reaccredited under his leadership. But I think it's really just to show that the department's committed to excellence, and we're always looking for ways. We get outside observers and reviewers to come in and take a look at our operations to make sure that we're doing things in the right way. And every time they give us a report, even when you get your accreditation, you get a list of recommendations for improvements, things that you need to work on and change or update. And I think this bringing this consultant in is going to be a welcome additional input that we'll receive that will help us with addressing issues that we see that we're challenged with, where we need to work to be better. I really do appreciate everyone's commitment to this task force and your willingness to serve. I especially, just recently, I appreciate the work that the RFP committee did. You all did really some heavy lifting for all of us, and I really appreciate that. And the way that you struggled together and then worked through together to get a recommendation for us. But, as city employees, we're constantly given the challenge to serve with excellence and to build trust in our community. And this includes our police officers. And the police department is committed to this. And I appreciate the work of our police officers and the way that they serve in our community. The trust of our community is critical to us. And the work that the police department does and the work that every single officer does every day has a significant effect on community confidence. The confidence of our community and the confidence of this committee in our police department and where we're headed going forward as we're working through this is imperative to me. And it's a cornerstone of service to our community. There's got to be this trust. We know that we recently have had 3 officer-involved shootings that happened over about a 2-week period. And one of those officer-involved shootings occurred on November 23rd and resulted in the death of 15-year-old Stavion Rodriguez. When officer-involved shootings happen, we take these very seriously. Every time it happens, it's a tragic situation for everyone involved, and our entire community grieves. We are concerned about incidents like this, and I know that some people are angry about this one in particular, and I get it. I understand that. Stavion's death is particularly painful because of his age, and please know that our goal overall is to have 0 officer-involved shootings, 0 officer-involved, 0 in custody deaths. That we don't want to see that happen at all. We know sometimes the situations that happens as a result of the situations, we want to try to work to improve that and get to where through this review process that we're going through with this task force and with these consultants that will come in to look at our policies and our procedures and our tactics so that we can continue to improve. Chief Gorley has been our chief for about 18 months. He has a desire to improve the department and a willingness to try new ideas and approaches. He's constantly bringing to me what they're doing within the department where they've identified an area of weakness or an area that needs improvement and things that they're doing to try to improve. His officers trust him. They have confidence in him. I believe we have the right person in this role and that we need to give him a chance to show what he can do to lead us through this. I have confidence in his ability to lead the department in these challenging times. As a task force in our first few meetings, we spent a lot of time receiving information. In addition to the struggle and debate today about the RFP, the consultant selection, we heard additional information about this CALIA accreditation. And so we've been trying to provide information just to give better background to the full task force. But for a lot of us, it's felt a little bit passive, I think. I'm pretty sure the RFP committee members do not feel like it's passive at all because they've been working very hard. But now taking this next step to make the recommendation for the consultant is going to give us the opportunity to move forward now and get to work and get this work done. Our roles as task force members are critical. Each one of us, everyone on this task force has a role and a responsibility. And I'm confident that every one of you are going to contribute as we go through this process. Everyone has stepped up and shown that they're willing to hold us accountable, and they're committed to holding us accountable to accomplish this and to make these improvements. Your review of our de-escalation policy and our accountability back to the community will be critical in strengthening the excellence with which we serve through our police department in our community. We have to work together and find new solutions to the problems and challenges the departments face nationally, police departments face nationally, and we must do everything we can to keep our residents and officers out of dangerous situations. I understand that trust is hard to acquire or to attain, and I know it's really easy to lose. But please know that we are always working to earn your trust and the trust of our community. There are multiple layers of an officer-involved shooting investigation, including the internal reviews. Now, first is the criminal investigation. I know the chief may talk a little bit more about that, but there's a criminal investigation that's done, and the district attorney is involved. An elected official outside of the city organization will determine any prosecutorial judgments that occur as a result of the investigations and as a result of the district attorney's office review. So that'll be conducted outside. We will do internal administrative reviews, and all of these reviews take several months to complete. There's a significant number of witnesses, there's video evidence, there's a lot of information to go through and a lot of work to be done. So it takes time to get through this process. The review, in addition to reviewing the actions of individual officers involved and the circumstances of that event, also take a look at our own policies, our tactics, and our training to see what needs to change in this. That's not to say that it would exclude anything. We're going to keep moving forward with this, but it's not to say it would exclude anything. Even if we see something we need to change, anything that comes back from this task force will definitely be something that gets incorporated into our policies and procedures. And so that's something, or it'll be our plan to try to work towards that. I know there's challenges with different laws and requirements that we have with our contracts, but our plan will be to work with this task force to see these changes made. We will continue to do all that we can to improve and to respond to incidents, but the work of this task force is going to be critical for us, both in improving in the way that we serve, but also in improving the trust in the community. So I just want to say again, we are saddened by the events that have happened recently, but we're committed to working through this process and being open about the process, and we're committed to making improvements in the way that we serve. And with that, I want to turn it over to Chief Gorley and allow him to just make a statement in regard to these recent events.
Thank you, sir. First, I want to apologize to everyone for being a little late to the meeting. We had recruit class 141 graduate 49 recruits today, and we had a little kind of ceremony scaled down because of COVID, but we just wanted to honor their service and their accomplishment today. So that's why I was running a little bit late. As City Manager Freeman said, these officer-involved shootings, they have a devastating effect on the lives of the family members, the involved officers, and the community as a whole. We've also seen how these tragic incidents can even have tremendous negative impact on the entire country. This is why we are all here. We want to be better as a department and a community to avoid these tragic incidents. There's nothing I want more than to work toward a goal of never having another deadly encounter between the police and any resident of our community. It's not good for our officers. It causes a lot of trauma. Causes a lot of trauma to those families and everybody that they work around, and again, the community too. So it's something that it should be a goal for us to not have these incidents. This task force was formed just for this purpose. So the police department is not autonomous from the community. We are not separate. We are one. We're all in this together. The safety of our residents and our officers is all of our responsibility. It's not just ours as a police department. It's important to know and for me to say to everyone here that I don't have all the answers. I've listened to each of you speak at some point during each of these meetings, and it's clear none of you have all the answers either. But that's why we have to rely on each other and work together to make things better. The police can't solve it all, and this is why our progress and naming an outside consultant, in my opinion, are so important. This outside perspective will hopefully bring us together toward the common goal of making a better police department and a better community in Oklahoma City. Last, just in reference to the most recent events, I just want to ask, for one thing, or for your assistance in that, and that's patience, which is probably the most difficult thing to do. But the process takes time because we want to do it right, and we want to get others involved, so it's not just our eyes looking at this. We should all want every aspect of each event looked at as part of a thorough process. There's many layers to these investigations that start with the criminal case, which will be presented to the district attorney. And then there's an administrative case review to look at our policies and procedures and how the incidents were handled, on that from an internal standpoint. This process is also going to include a one-on-one meeting with the families in each incident once the criminal case is complete. This is something we've done ever since we implemented body cameras. We don't want to release any video footage out to the public or for the media or anyone else to see until that family has a chance to view it as well. And that also gives us a chance to sit down one-on-one with them and answer any questions that they have. So I want to also assure you that we don't sit still while all this is going on, because it can take, months to accomplish. We're looking at our training and processes all the time, making changes as we go. Even on these instances, there's a lot of things we can't do yet because we don't know all the facts. But anything that we do notice as we go, we try to address because we don't want it to happen again if there is something there that we can do better at. We're constantly evaluating everything we do. And this isn't just in relation to significant events. It's in relation to day-to-day things that we do as a police department, because we're always trying to do better and improve. And that's what our CLIA accreditation requires us to do, is we can't just sit back and be happy with where we're at. We have to try to improve constantly. So I just want to thank everybody here, most importantly, for your willingness to serve on this task force. And I look forward to seeing what we can all accomplish together, because that's what it's going to take for us as a community to, to be better and be stronger, is that all of us work together. So I thank all of you for devoting your time. I know this is very time consuming, and I just appreciate all that you're doing to help us.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Freeman. Appreciate you all being here and making those comments to the task force. Does the task force have any other business that we need to take care of at this time? Hearing none, I would like to say that the next meeting of the task force is on January the 14th at 1:30. Between now and then, Craig, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just saw that Sarah Adams Cornell raised her hand.
Oh, okay. Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's time here today. I wanted to address a couple of things. One, I feel like as a community member that our time here isn't equitable. I feel like it has been driven very heavily by the city, and that as people who have as much vested interest in this and coming in our time, that there should be more equity in the leadership of these meetings pertaining to the agenda and the running of the meetings. And I would like to recommend that we rotate, that the agenda and that the running of the meetings toggle back and forth between the community and the city. One of the big things that I hoped would happen during our time together would be education for the city, that you have this incredible group of really community members who are incredibly plugged in their communities. And I feel it's equally important that you listen to us to tell you what's happening in our communities and what we need to see happen as we move forward with the 21 CP, that they should be happening together. And I know they are going to engage the community and be listening to the community, but as a task force, I think we have an obligation to do better, to not just hear what the city's doing and hear about labor laws for 3 hours and hear about all of these things that are not necessarily why I'm here. I want to be able to communicate to the city what's happening in the Indigenous community, what we need to see happen, the changes that we can come together on, and then you all figure out like how you get that done. I don't think it's necessarily my responsibility to figure out how all of these pieces work together to see that change happen. That's your job. My job is to bring to the play, or bring to the table what's happening in my community and the things that we would like to see change. I feel sometimes that our scope is too narrow to be able to see some of the changes that we need to see happen immediately happen. So even like reviewing the scope of work that we're doing, I think would be very helpful. And so just, you know, as I hear, you know, various people talk about trust and confidence of community, I think one thing that builds trust and confidence is your education of our communities. And I think that's going to be paramount. But I would love to hear from other community members too. I feel like this is a heavily city-run agenda, and I hope to see more equity. I hope to see us give more equity of leadership in this space to community members and not just the city leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. And I certainly agree with a lot of what you said there. It's not just our show, it's your show too. And we will do what we can to make some of that happen. Anybody else? Mr. Cooper.
I hate to be the one to speak right after someone has just said it's too city heavy. I'm only going to speak to say I second that concern, and that I would like to, before this group meets again, to know what a toggling back and forth could look like as 2021 begins. Like, what could it be? You know, one meeting it's hearing from folk in our Indigenous community and their needs and their hopes. You know, that was, anyway, I'll leave it at that. Needs and hopes, right? And then maybe the next, it's from folk with differing abilities, LGBT. And I think that's helpful, because one of the concerns I have listening to today with 21CP coming on, and again, I'm so excited to hear what I heard from Valerie and Joanne and folk like that. I'm so proud of their work, in fact. But, you know, nothing in K through 12 in Oklahoma teaches us about Oklahoma City. And if one of you on this call got that education, you are so lucky, because most of us don't. And I'm speaking as someone from Oklahoma. And so for an external group to come here, and even, again, as folks said earlier, people are clearly technically capable of the work ahead of us. However, without the specific knowledge of the traumas, that's the word, the traumas generationally that the respective communities have experienced, without city leadership hearing that, and I include myself in that. I've been on a learning curve for the literal last 20 years of my adult life. Like, I've just learned so much that I would never learned in the classroom. So I really would challenge us to take Sarah up on what she's asking, because I'm certain I have a lot more to learn about our Hispanic Latinx community here in its history, Indigenous folk, differing abilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know who would be responsible for kind of shaping out a rough draft of whom we need to be hearing from, who's already on this committee, and what that sort of rotation could look like. But I think it's imperative, and it's a concern I have raised as well on the working group, that folk from pastors to former law enforcement people on that committee are so knowledgeable, and they're excited about what the consultant's going to bring in terms of research, but they are capable of research on those items too. And my deep concern, and I was thinking about it I've thought about it for months, but today's call really hammered it home. I just started envisioning trying to post about, where we are on this matter on social media. And I can tell you right now that there is still a distrust from any one of those respective marginalized communities. And unless folk feel like the representation on this committee had a chance to speak their respective truths to us as city leaders and then to the consultant, the policies we put forward it won't hold. The center will not hold. That's my grave concern. So I'm really glad Sarah brought that up.
You're muted, MT.
Okay, how about that? Next hand I see raised is Mr. Freeman.
Yes, I was just going to respond and say that, we could definitely, I think we've had one time before. Right now, what we've been trying to do is just get information out to make sure the group had a lot of information about the police department, kind of where we are. But definitely, I think moving into this next phase with the consultants, I think will open that door in itself, working with the consultants, but we can certainly make sure that we work with MT. He's appointed as the facilitator of the group by the mayor, but we can work with him, with the group. You all can send it to us or something to MT. We'll make sure that we get any information there, if someone wants to share something. And so we'll work on a plan of reaching out and trying to get some information and make sure that we can incorporate some of that in there, because I think you're exactly right that making sure that we have all voices heard is going to be really critical. And so we'll make sure that we incorporate that. As to the scope of work, I think the thing I would say is 21CP is going to have a broader scope of work than even this task force and the community policing working group, both of them, I think. I believe their scope of work that they bring is broader than that, but our scope of work that we have within this task force was defined by the mayor when he established the task force to look at de-escalation and at the citizen advisory board. But it's not to say that it's that narrow that it can only be those two, because I think there'll be a lot of things that are related to that will tie into this, that we'll be able to say, yeah, this is linked to citizen advisory board, this is linked to de-escalation, and be able to look broader than that. But that is our primary focus. And so we'll make sure that we're working with that primary focus. But in the end, 21CP will be serving the community policing working group, this task force, but their scope will go even beyond that and look in other areas as well. So not just limited to our scope within our individual task force and working group, but we'll definitely take you up on that and work to do a better job of that.
Right. And don't forget also that we also had an organization that agreed to help us, and that is the Department of Justice Community Relations Services, that said that they would come in and help us. And we certainly would like to do that, especially I think they would be fitted to do some of what you talk about, Sarah, and get us a little bit more coordinated with that type of presentations. But we didn't want to get too far ahead of our other consultant, because we want both consultants to be able to work together to do the things that need to be done, so that it doesn't come across quite so piecemeal, which is kind of what you've been getting right now. So now that as soon as we get these consultants on board and get them engaged, then I think we can do a better job of hearing from everybody and telling us how we do that, how we get out into the community and how we get the community to talk to us. So T. Cherie Dickerson, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just again wanted to basically plus one what Sarah said about changing the way the facilitation goes. And that's certainly not any implication that you have not been doing an amazing job, MT. It's just about when we as community leaders have to go out and we want to be transparent and accountable to the communities that are expecting us to represent them and to give voice to their concerns. There's not an accessible bridge building of trust if I go and present and say, well, there was an entity chosen based on today what I heard, like technical ability. Because they're going to ask, okay, well, great, they're technically able to understand what my Blackness, my queerness, my indigeneity, any of those things. And we need to be able to have confidence in the response that we give. If we don't, and if things are just based on contract and technical ability, I think it is going to further impede the progress and the ability to bring more of a cohesive conversation, discussion, understanding, and or trust building of various marginalized communities. And so I think we have to remain mindful of that. So it's not just, it wasn't basically when she said it, it resonated, not just as a great idea, but something that it's necessary.
It's necessary.
And
I agree.
If it is not done, then all of the work that we're doing really is for moot.
I agree with you on that. And don't worry about me. I'm not, it doesn't bother me at all because I agree with what she said, that we do need to get that type of information flow started. And I appreciate you letting us know. Thank you. In the meantime, let me do this. Because if any of you have issues or things that you would like to see at the next meeting, I know this may not be the way we do it permanently, but I'll put my information out there right now so that you can contact me by email and let me know what it is that you would like to do. And I can certainly start compiling that information so we get prepared for our next meeting. But my email address, for those of you who would like to have it, are you ready? It's M as in Mary, T as in Tom, .berry, B-E-R-R-Y, at okc.gov. M as in Mary, T as in Tom, .berry, B-E-R-R-Y, at okc.gov. And then we'll try to coordinate that and see what we can get started. Okay? Any other business? Then let me say this. I certainly want to wish everyone here, all of you, a very happy and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's, since we won't see any of you before then. I do expect to hear from some of you, though, about what we just talked about. Okay? If there's no other business, then our meeting will be adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.